Hey everyone, I was actually going to do a sort of horror game past and present video. Couldn't remember what I was actually going to say when I actually started recording. So I actually ended up thinking a little bit about the Saw franchise, the video game franchise. Is sort of because I've played through Saw 1 and I've played a little bit of Saw 2. And I was always sort of this. I was always a big fan of the first Saw. I mean, it really was really a great, suspenseful movie. And I enjoyed the second one, and I felt that the third Saw movie was a bit lackluster, and I always felt that the series sort of went downhill after Saw 3. And when I started playing the video games, I beat Saw 1 and I played half of Saw 2. And I always felt that these games, there's so much potential in the Saw video games for me. And I always felt that if there's any horror franchise out there that could be a great horror video game, it can be the Saw franchise. And I think it's sort of unfortunate that these developers aren't given enough time to actually develop and make a proper Saw video game. I really don't blame the developers for making these sort of lackluster Saw video games. I really blame, the publisher for not giving these developers enough time to really sort of create and establish a proper video game for a franchise that really is giving you all the scenarios, really giving you a lot of great ideas to sort of make into a video game. And while I was thinking about these things, I sort of thought about, what kind of advice would I give, to these developers that have very sort of limited time to make these sort of Saw video games. And one of the things that sort of came up to me was that the third-person perspective, third-person combat in Saw usually wasn't all that great. Usually it was pretty glitchy, and the combat when it came to when you're swinging your stick or your pipe, it doesn't really make proper contact to the enemy. And you always sort of see this weird animation between him throwing and the guys falling down. And I always sort of thought about, instead of making it third person and seeing the character and the sort of problems that the character looks, why not just put it into first person? The first thing that sort of came to mind for me was Condemned Project Origins. First person, hand-to-hand combat. If you look at Condemned and Saw the video game, they're actually very similar. The only difference is you don't have the crazy traps that Saw has. So if there was a way that they can have the Saw video game stick into a first-person perspective, that it would make it that much more immersive for the player than seeing this character not really designed very well and has this sort of awkward walk and all these things. Stick into first person is much more immersive. If you have to take, or in this case steal, the Condemned combat system, do it. The first person perspective is not just, it is there to be a more immersive tool, but it was also an opportunity to really tell your story in a sort of interesting way. Because it would be kind of cool if if you started, and they did this in Saw 2, the video game, to a certain extent, but not, don't let me know who the main character is. Use the first person perspective of me not knowing who I am as a tool to tell your story. I think there's a lot of sort of interesting avenues you can do with that and be really fun. And another thing that I found somewhat fascinating that they didn't use too much of was the camera. the camera was used in Saw 1 as a sort of tool to sort of, bring up the suspense of only seeing light for a second and then you have to reflash again. And when I played first Saw, that was a great tool of suspense. I mean, I was terrified because you can only flash one time for every couple of seconds. And I suggest to keep using that tool because it really heightens the tension and really it's something that is a sort of thing that the Saw series does and really needs to take advantage of that because it's actually one of the great moments that Saw 1 really did have, and I think they need to find a way to keep using that, whether it's puzzles or anything like that. It's a great tool that they should keep using. Another thing that I feel that they could perhaps keep in there is the jigsaw dolls that were in Saw 2. They're sort of like the Riddler puzzles in Batman Arkham Asylum, where you see them, but you have to sort of do this sort of side quests in order to get these things, or sort of side puzzle. And I always thought those were very, very sort of cool and fun things in Saw 2. And I think they need to keep doing those type of things, just keep adding little side quests that really, really just enhances the atmosphere of the Saw video games. Another thing they should definitely keep in there is the sort of environmental disasters or elements where you have the glass on the floor or you have these sort of wire that if you trip it, a gunshot, will kill you. And once again, all these things you could keep in there. Just put it in first person because it's really a perspective that really works and I think would work very well for the Saw video game. I mean, once again, I still think that the Saw video game franchise can be great. I think it has the tools, it has everything in the movie that it takes to make a great video game. It's just I wish that these developers had enough time to really put all those great ideas together. It takes more than 1 year to make a proper video game, and if they would give these guys 2 or 3 years to really make something, I'm sure they would make something really, really great and worth the $60 in advance. So these are just some of my thoughts about the game. So if you have any, definitely comment. So all you guys take care.